Good morning. I call this hearing to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I want to thank everyone, especially our witness, for joining us today for our committee's hybrid hearing. I want to make sure to note some important requirements. Let me begin by saying that standing House and committee rules and practice will continue to apply during hybrid proceedings. All members are reminded that they are expected to adhere to these standing rules, including decorum. With that said, the technology we are utilizing today requires us to make some small modifications to ensure that the members can fully participate in these proceedings. During the cover period as designated by the Speaker, the committee will operate in accordance with House Resolution 965 and the subsequent guidance from the Rules Committee in a manner that respects the rights of all members to participate. House regulations require members to be visible through a video connection throughout the proceedings, so please keep your cameras on. Also, if you have to participate in another proceeding, please exit this one and log back in later. In the event a member encounters technical issues that prevent them from being recognized for their questioning, I will move to the next available member of the same party and will recognize that member at the next appropriate time slot, provided they have returned to the proceeding. Should a member's time be interrupted by technical issues, I will recognize that member at the next appropriate spot for the remainder of their time once their issues has been resolved. In the event a witness loses connectivity during testimony or questioning, I will preserve their time as staff address the technical issues. I may need to recess the proceedings to provide time for the witness to reconnect. And finally, remember to remain muted until you are recognized to minimize background noise. In accordance with the rules established under House Resolution 965, staff have been advised to mute participants only in the event there is inadvertent background noise. Should a member wish to be recognized, they must unmute themselves and seek recognition at the appropriate time. For those members here in the room today, we will also be following the health and safety guidelines issued by the attending physician. That includes social distancing and especially the use of masks. I urge members and staff to wear masks at all times while in the hearing room, and I thank you in advance for your commitment to a safe environment for all here today. Last night, on the eve of the date the Paycheck Protection Program expires, the Senate passed a bill to extend the program to August 8th. From the inception of the program, I have clearly stated that until we know where the money is going and how our very small businesses, which includes independent contractors and sole proprietors and minority and women-owned firms are faring, we cannot blindly extend the program. With that said, Congress still does not have the raw loan data it was promised, nor does the public have any information. In May, Congress passed the HEROES Act, which extended the program through the end of the year and set aside funds for small businesses with fewer than 10 employees and leveraging our mission-based lenders, like CDFIs, MDIs, and microlenders. Moreover, this important bill included provisions to require the administration to provide regular disclosure to Congress and the public. Yesterday, Secretary Mnuchin stated he was working with the Senate on the next steps for PPP and spoke of secondary loans. As I have said all along, I invite the Senate and the administration to sit down with us to discuss extending PPP loan authority and the many improvements put forth by members of this committee. We're meeting today to conduct an important hearing on SBA implementation of the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, or as some call it, the EIDL program, which was activated on March 12, making it the first economic relief program to assist small businesses adversely impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. I would like to thank Mr. James Rivera, the Associate Administrator for SBA's Office of Disaster Assistance, for being here today to discuss many of the issues surrounding the implementation of the EIDL program. Mr. Rivera, I value your commitment and the hard work of your staff, and I fully understand the extraordinary efforts put forth to respond to this unprecedented crisis. However, we are holding this hearing today because of some very concerning issues that have hindered relief for thousands of small businesses. As you know, we held a hearing last month in which we heard directly from the EIDL applicants about their experiences with the program. One small business owner discussed the negative impact of SBA unilateral reduction of the maximum loan size from $2 million to $150,000, a cut more than 90%. He, like thousands of small business owners across the country, were drawn to the EIDL program largely due to the ability to use an EIDL loan for more than just payroll. Imagine being in the position of thinking this program at a max of $2 million is just what your business needs, only to learn at loan approval that SBA had drastically reduced the loan amount. This is precisely the kind of information that needs to be conveyed to borrowers ahead of time. It makes it a fundamentally different loan product, and for those who needed an amount greater than $150,000, EIDL was rendered irrelevant. Throughout the process, SBA showed a lack of understanding of the challenges facing small businesses related to COVID-19, especially by offering a one-size-fits-all $150,000 loan without offering them an opportunity to apply for a second loan or seek additional funding. Small businesses looking to the SBA for help were essentially told, take it or leave it, regardless of need or size, and then told to have a nice day. We also heard from a community pharmacist in South Philadelphia who applied for the EIDL loan but was denied due to unsatisfactory credit history. This is a lifelong entrepreneur who has struggled with razor-thin margins and is now saddled with additional burdens due to COVID-19. Borrowers like the community pharmacists who have been denied for allegedly unsatisfactory credit history have reported that the credit threshold for approving loan is not clear and borrowers do not know what the limit is, leaving them feeling like the decision was arbitrary. I am sure it will be helpful to all if SBA simply communicated the credit minimums to small businesses up front. I have also heard from small businesses who were denied because of unverifiable information, meaning there were items that were reviewed that caused SBA to question the validity of the items. But the denial letter never detailed the information that was missing, leaving applicants with little insight as to why they were denied. Though these decisions can be appealed, that only adds to the delays and expenses of a struggling business owner. These businesses need relief, and they need it now. Even more troubling is the fact that the SBA has not communicated well with applicants, nor has it provided them with reliable ways to check the status of their applications. Borrowers are simply told that the loan is processing. The only other updates they receive are whether the loan has been approved or denied. Applicants need to know where they stand in the queue so they know how much longer they must wait before receiving financing. And given the current economic climate, if they're going to be denied, they deserve to know quickly so that they can explore options for capital elsewhere. Finally, there was a long period during which the EIDL application portal was limited to only agricultural small businesses, which is completely at odds with the intent of the Small Business Act and the mission of the SBA, which is to aid, counsel, assist, and protect the interests of all small businesses. It is particularly troubling to have heard allegations that these loans were being processed before other applications that were already in the queue, and we hope to get a clear answer on that today. As the committee continues its oversight duties, I am looking forward to hearing from Mr. Rivera about how many applications are currently pending in the queue, how much more funding is necessary to meet the loan demand, and what steps SBA is planning to take to ensure small businesses across the country receive the economic relief they need to survive. Already, a number of large companies have declared bankruptcy post-COVID-19, and experts say it's not long before this wave of bankruptcies hits small businesses. We need to be doing more to help avert this outcome. With that, I look forward to hearing from Mr. Rivera on the EIDL's performance in response to COVID-19 and what ODA needs from Congress to fully implement the EIDL program consistent with our intent. I now yield to the ranking member, Mr. Chabot, for the opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for holding this meeting on the Small Business Administration's Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, popularly known as the EIDL program. At the beginning of the year, the nation's economy and the country's small businesses were reaching new heights. We were experiencing historic levels of unemployment, and momentum was building. For example, unemployment among African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans was at all-time lows, meaning that more and more people were working. That was a good thing. Unfortunately, COVID-19 made its way to our shores. As a result, a huge number of America's small businesses, coast to coast, were forced to close their doors and turn off their lights. With demand for goods and services limited by this emergency, small businesses shifted to survival mode. It was clear from the beginning that the nation's smallest firms would need immediate access to capital to weather the storm. The SBA was handed a task that was unequaled in our history. Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, and the federal agency that represents, assists, and fights for America's smallest firms responded by setting up the Paycheck Protection Program, which works in partnership with private lenders to deliver funds to small businesses. This program has delivered 4.8 million loans in the amount of nearly over half a trillion dollars now. The SBA also continued to administer the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, EIDL, which had its roots as a post-event recovery program for businesses and communities that were hit by a natural disaster. Both of these programs, from the beginning of this crisis, experienced overwhelming, unprecedented demand. EIDL shifted immediately from being a regional program, a natural disaster typically strikes a particular locale, to a full-fledged national relief program. Thus far, the program has delivered just over 2 million loans for $127 billion. In my home state of Ohio, for example, the program has delivered 45,000 loans for $2.6 billion to date. I would like to thank the SBA for being a vital resource to the nation's small businesses, entrepreneurs, and startups. However, we're a number of months into this crisis now, and the SBA's EIDL program has a lot of room for improvement. While EIDL loans are being processed and the advanced grants are being dispersed, too many small businesses are left with questions. Questions on communication, questions on the status of their loan, and questions surrounding the maximum loan amount under the program. When small business owners are left with limited information, common everyday business decisions become difficult. We must strive to provide small businesses with as much information as possible, especially during these uncertain times. I look forward to getting to the bottom of many of these questions and determining how we can work together to provide solutions for our nation's smallest firms. I want to thank the SBA's Associate Administrator for the Office of Disaster Assistance, Mr. James Rivera, for joining us today. Look forward to his testimony and also obviously answering questions from members on both sides of the aisle. As was the case prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, I know that small businesses will once again be our nation's guiding light. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chabot. I'd like to take a moment to explain how this hearing will proceed. Each witness will have 5 minutes to provide a statement, and each committee member will have 5 minutes for questions. Please ensure that your mic is on when you begin speaking and that you return to mute when finished. With that, I would like to introduce Mr. James Rivera, the Associate Administrator for SBA Office of Disaster Assistance. In his capacity, Mr. Rivera directs the SBA Disaster Loan Program, including EIDL. He began his SBA career in Texas in 1989, serving as a disaster loan specialist. Over his 30 years SBA career, he has also served as the Associate Administrator for the Office of Financial Assistance, and prior to his public service, Mr. Rivera was a commercial loan officer in the private sector. We welcome you back to the committee, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Velasquez, Ranking Member Chabot, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to update you on the agency's Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program and our response to the coronavirus pandemic. In March, SBA worked with all states and territories to facilitate approval of 56 disaster declarations for small businesses affected by the pandemic. At that time, Administrator Carranza made an important administrative change to ease the business impact certification. This enabled SBA to provide disaster loans for small businesses in all 50 states and 6 U.S. territories, and it established a nationwide disaster assistance program. As a result, the loan numbers and dollars we're experiencing are unprecedented so far. This agency has provided economic relief to over 6.8 million small businesses for over $147 billion. This more than doubles the amount of disaster aid provided in the entire 67-year history of the agency. To help achieve that, SBA created and implemented an entirely new online portal application and distribution system for EIDL loans and grants. This system has now handled over 8 million applications and has allowed us to distribute dollars to those small businesses in record time. Currently, we're processing grants in less than 2 days. The pandemic and nationwide program has also required the agency to scale up our disaster staff, now totaling over 7,000 personnel. Meanwhile, our program office continues to service 175 other major and agency disaster declarations, which total $1 billion in natural disasters this year, including the 2 recent requests from governors for small businesses assisted in areas of civil unrest. These successes, unparalleled and historic for the agency, have not been without their challenges. However, let me mention a few. First, between mid-March and the end of April, the agency had to stop processing applications 3 times. This was due to the program changes made through CARES Act legislation, the lack of funds, and the need to stand up an entirely new system to administer the grants. During this time, the agency received close to 4 million applications in a 2-week period. This did set us back, and we've now been working hard to catch up since. And moving quickly to build the new system, we unfortunately were not able to provide the same internal visibility as exists with our disaster loan application portal. This, combined with the application volume mentioned above, resulted in uncertainty for many. Following the exhaustion of funds and in receiving additional funding, the agency looked at how best to maximize these dollars for pending applications. Newly eligible agricultural enterprise businesses and future applicants in reopening the portal 2 weeks ago. We also need to keep in mind that the disaster application period, as defined in the 56 declarations, runs through mid-December. With regards to the idle grants or advances, the agency also looked at how best to maximize those funds. We consulted bill authors, and through a per-employee allocation, we now have been able to reach 2.2 million more businesses with financial aid. I mentioned the significant growth in our staffing, but that comes with the need of education and training. We continue to adjust every week to the demands in our call center and in our loan processing centers. In highlighting our successes and reflecting our challenges, it's also important to evaluate where we are today. We have been continuously processing loans for 2 months. All applications have now been initially decisioned. All advances have been distributed. Our processing times, due to volume and stoppages, averaged around 41 days. Since we reopened the portal, our processing times for new applications are now 5 days. We are much stronger and at a stable operational staff level today, and small businesses are getting the needed dollars dispersed to them in record times. At SBA, our mission is one of service. We have a proud history of helping small business owners in their time of need. Every disaster event is unique, and there are always lessons learned. While facing a disaster situation unlike any in our agency's history, we have had to do this while operating in a telework and virtual environment ourselves. And we've also not been affected by the pandemic, losing one of our dedicated staff members to the virus. In the end, I know we share a common goal: to provide economic relief to American small businesses. We will continue to do our very best, and we will continue to work closely with you to achieve that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Rivera, SBA received approximately $2.7 billion in funding for salaries and expenses to fulfill your mission to deliver the PPP, EIDL, and other agency programs to struggling small businesses. What portion was allocated to the Office of Disaster Assistance? How much has been spent, and what have been the biggest cost drivers?
Thank you, Madam. We received 2 sets of funds. We used $7 billion initially in our existing disaster funds. It was carryover from Harvey, Irma, Maria on the loan side. On the administrative side, Congress was generous enough to give us $470 million, and we're close to spending through that right now. The $2.1 billion we have planned out over the next, I think it sunsets in September of 2021, so we're working through that funds right now. Major costs, to answer your question, we have 7,000 employees. We have close to 2,000 contractors. We're running a 24/7 operation at the call center. So a lot of these expenses that we've not had in a natural disaster have grown exponentially with this effort.
So you hired more staff, you hired contractors to help you perform the duties of the office in providing assistance to small businesses. And so that is one of the first issues that I raised, and I was the one fighting here to get that money to you because I've been in this committee for 28 years, and I know every time that there is a natural disaster, how bad the agency has failed because budget has consequences, right? And every time that the budget is cut, so manpower is going to be reduced, and here we are. Of course, that we provided the money to hire more staff and to hire contractors, bring in contractors, but then there is the training and so on. So those are issues that we need to keep in mind because climate change is not going away, and we're going to be in this position many, many times more. Mr. Rivera, I have heard countless complaints about SBA's poor customer service. Applicants spent hours on hold only to be told their applications were pending and to check back again next week. Why were SBA systems unable to provide more detailed information regarding the flow of the application through the approval process?
Let me, if I can, take you back to mid-December. We started this, we have this system internally that we respond to natural disasters. It's the Disaster Credit Management System 2.0. We used that for the first 2 to 3 weeks. When we received the opportunity to do a grant program, which we've never had a grant program on the disaster loan side, we pivoted to an existing contract that we received post Harvey, Irma, Maria. It was a surge contract that enabled us to rebuild it. And looking back, we should have had visibility, no doubt about it, similar to the way we have with the pre-disaster loan application portal, the disaster loan application portal. What happened, though, is in our angst to get this service out and get to this new portal, we did not have visibility in the application portal. Once we get invited into the loan queue or to the grant queue, there's visibility, but in hindsight, we should have added that additional visibility that we didn't have.
At the Senate hearing a few weeks ago, Administrator Carranza said that the SBA was working to add more visibility to the automated system. When will that be completed?
So we don't have any loans in the application queue anymore. Everything's been processed. Since we've reopened the portal, we've received close to additional $2 million loan applications. Everything is in the loan queue. So there's visibility from that perspective, and all grants have been processed.
So why then did she say that the administration was planning to add more visibility?
I think you go back to the June 15th date. It's just the amount of applications we had in the queue. I think it was a timing issue.
Okay. So thank you. Mr. Rivera, we understand that SBA limited the size of the EIDL loan to $150,000. What percentage of applicants had requested and based on the EIDL calculation should have received more than $150,000? So
we currently run 80% of the applications are below $150,000. The average loan is like $61,000 overall. We have 19% of the applications that are at that $150,000 threshold.
So can you answer my question, just the percentage of people that applied for $2 million that didn't receive it and just got $150,000?
So, madam, I don't have that information because—
Can you please forward that information to us?
Sure, but we determine economic injury. You can request whatever you want, but it's based on 6 months of working capital. And I think we could have done a better job communicating that it's based on 6 months of working capital. It's not based on whatever loan amount that you're requesting. It's different than a traditional, bank loan from that perspective.
Okay, my time has expired, and I now recognize the ranking member.
Thank you,
Mr.
Madam
Cobb.
Chair. Mr. Rivera, I've heard from many small businesses and numerous members of Congress about the lack of communication coming from the SBA with regard to the EIDL program specifically. How can we work together to ensure that small businesses receive the most up-to-date information on EIDL assistance? And are there any programmatic changes that we need to consider?
The last 3 months it's been a tough road, obviously. This is a national footprint. It's not a regional disaster from that perspective. We've learned a lot from a communication perspective. And to answer your question, we need to do a better job of getting what the program guidelines are out there and being able to, for all small businesses to understand from that perspective. We thought we were communicating pretty well. From the perspective of when we talked to each individual business owner, they knew exactly what we were trying to do and what we were trying to address their needs, but there's always room for improvement, and we're willing to work with Congress however you see fit.
We definitely would want to work with you on that, and I think both sides, this is a very bipartisan committee, and I think we can work together with you to improve this. As we consider ways to improve the federal response to this emergency and emergencies in the future, do you believe that private lenders could have a role within the disaster loan program?
Let me state what we're actually doing. We had the surge contract. We've actually used this surge contract. The name, I'll hold back the name of the company. I can tell you offline if you want. But basically, this company is doing what private lenders are doing. When we moved to this portal, they're processing the loan for us. Under the traditional EIDL, the goal is 2 loans per day. Under this contract that we're using, where we have this business doing, this bank-type business doing an algorithm, we can do 25 loans a day. So we are using the private sector in a private-public partnership relationship to process these loans. We could have not processed on our existing platform. That's why we stopped for 2 weeks. We went in, we built this portal with this company, with this institution, and that's what's enabled us to do that. Definitely moving forward, this is the path forward. It has increased the cycle times, it's increased the productivity, it's helped us provide quicker, faster service from that perspective.
That's good to hear, because obviously injecting some of the private sector and competition in the government, which tends not to be, no offense or anything, a little less efficient, because we don't compete with others, they do. So, and we learned that in the PPP program. We had the private sector out there make the loans, and I think that sped up the process tremendously. My next question: we know more about this emergency today than we did in March. We're also starting to see some businesses return under modified operations. Congress is currently debating the federal government's next steps as it pertains to this emergency. As we continue to have these discussions, where should we concentrate our efforts within the EIDL program? Where should we make adjustments to ensure the program assists current small business applicants? And how can we structure the program to be flexible and nimble when the next disaster strikes?
Well, I have to thank the committee and Congress from the perspective of what you enabled us to do. You eliminated some statutory requirements. The credit elsewhere test is not required. We didn't have to get federal tax returns, so we went truly with just a credit score from that perspective. So you've been very helpful through this process. As we continue to take a daily look at the amount of volume that we have 8 million applications in relation to what we processed. We'll continue to have that discussion as far as other opportunities that we may have.
Okay. How are you and how should we measure the effectiveness of the EIDL program?
Effectiveness. I wish I could approve every loan. I really do. We have to have a credit standard. We are a loan standard. I mean, we have our current approval rates, 51%. One of the things that's been different with this new portal is we have a DocuSign type document where we're able to immediately disperse within the next day. Generally, under the traditional process, it takes us 2 to 3 weeks because we're flipping paper back and forth between us and the small business. We're 99% dispersed. So of the $131.9 billion that we've approved, we've already dispersed $130 billion to the small businesses. That's money in their bank. I mean, there's a day turnaround time from that perspective. So it's been a positive experience. That's one of the real lessons learned that we've used from a technology perspective, using the algorithms, using those type of features. What we need to figure out is how can we better improve on these individuals, these small businesses that we decline. Many of them received grants, you know, the advance from that perspective, but we're going to come out with the lessons learned, and we'll be sure to share that with you when this COVID period ends and we can move on and look back from that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. My time's expired, Madam Chair.
Time has expired, and now the gentle lady from Kansas, Ms. Davis, is recognized.
Thank you, Chairwoman Velasquez and Ranking Member Chabot, for holding this hearing today. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, or EIDL program, is definitely meant to provide an immediate lifeline to small businesses who are struggling to stay afloat during the coronavirus pandemic. But I have heard from too many small business owners in my community that they're experiencing chronic delays, a lack of transparency in response to their applications. And I know we've kind of been talking about that this morning already, but Mr. Rivera, first of all, thank you for joining us today. As I've heard from my constituents and witnesses in this committee that the chairwoman referenced earlier around their frustration, I'm curious about whether or not you all are working to provide more step-by-step information for applicants, and then, whether or not you're going to be able to have more frequent and open communications going forward, because, you're talking about the technological and operational work that you're doing. I'm just curious what that's going to look like going forward.
The current portal that we're using is exclusive to COVID. And what we've done is we have 1 to 2 million individuals that are in certain parts of the queue, so we'll continue to communicate. We've reached out 5, 6, 7 times via email. We're calling these 1 million to 2 million people through our call campaign. We're leaving messages. If I could fast forward to today, we're better operation than we were 90 days ago when we were standing up. Internally, we had to understand this new portal ourselves. So in looking back, we should have probably had better communications, been a little bit more transparent when it comes to these are the 10 steps in the process. And that's kind of the tactical approach that we're doing right now. As I've mentioned, everybody is in the loan queue. We've processed all the grants on the 8 million applications that we've received so far. We're still receiving 200,000 to 300,000 applications a day since we reopened the portal back in mid-June.
Thank you. And then just really quickly, the local SBA district office in the Kansas City metro area that serves the Kansas 3rd has done a great job of outreach and has been great at communicating with my office and our constituents. I'm curious about what kind of coordination is happening and communication with district offices and our entrepreneurial partners, and are there ways that we can better utilize those district offices for that function?
That's one of the things that Administrator Carranza reminds me daily of. No stovepipes organizationally. We're very collaborative with field operations. We thank field operations. They've given us several hundred employees to help us process these loans. We have a very clear communication. If there's a congressional, for example, that comes in from your district, we have a direct line of 20 plus disaster agents that can provide responses from that perspective. They do have other stuff other than COVID to do, but they spend all their time between PPP and EIDL as far as communicating back and forth with us.
Thank you. And, the last comment I'll make is just I've appreciated the chairwoman's work on helping us increase the transparency around who's been receiving the various loans and grants. And also, Mr. Rivera, I appreciate the work and your time today. With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you. And I'm going to take the privilege of using 55 seconds to ask you a follow-up question of the question that she asked, Ms. Davis, and that is that when we held the hearing here with SDVCs, all our partners, they mentioned that they learned of changes made by SBA on rules and guidance from the media. So you need to have better coordination with the partners that are in the field, helping and in providing the information, the most accurate information.
Yes, ma'am, we agree. Alan Gutierrez, the head of the small business development, the head of entrepreneur development, he's just right down the 5-10 offices away from me. The challenge we have is this was such a new process for us that as we communicated internally, sometimes people got to the media before we had the opportunity to get to our resource partners, and we clearly understand that we have to do a better job communicating.
Okay. So the gentle lady from American Samoa, Ms. Brady Wagon, is recognized for 5 minutes.
It's a beautiful morning here in Pago Pago, American Samoa at 3:30 a.m. And I want to thank Mr. Rivera for being with us today. Mr. Rivera, can you explain the rationale for initially allowing only agricultural related businesses access to the EIDL portal for weeks? That caused some confusion here in my home district. And what do you think members of Congress should focus on within the EIDL program as we debate the next steps?
Regarding the the agricultural applications, we process those concurrently. We set up a separate queue where we were continuing to process these loans that were in the queue, and then we set up a different track for the agricultural enterprises. So they were being processed concurrently, from that perspective. What could we do different? As I mentioned earlier, the ability to let us not have to do a credit elsewhere test, the ability for us not to have to get federal tax transcripts. From that perspective, a lot of those improvements have just been phenomenal and have enabled us to have a more cookie-cutter approach in order to get this assistance out as soon as possible.
Do you believe there's room for private lenders to operate within SBA's disaster loan program moving forward?
So as I mentioned earlier, we're using a private sector organization that has, we had a surge contract post Harvey Irma Maria, where that's their portal. So you go into the SBA website, you go up to their portal, they do the algorithm with all the data that they're completing, and then they bring it back to us for a loan officer for a team lead to do the decisioning. Had we not had that relationship and had we not had that contract, we wouldn't have been able to process 25 loans on average per loan officer per day. We'd be probably at 2 to 3 loans per day, which is not acceptable. So we do take advantage of these opportunities with these private sector organizations. We had this contract in place post HIM.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentle lady yields back, and now we recognize the gentle lady from California, Ms. Chu, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Rivera, the CARES Act provided $25 million for SBA to develop resources in non-English languages. And I do want to recognize the agency for publishing several guides and translations in 17 languages. Asian American businesses have been particularly hard hit by the COVID pandemic, and nearly 175,000 Asian American owned firms do business primarily in non-English languages. And in fact, 1/3 of the community is limited English proficient. If SBA does not fulfill its mandate to reach these firms with in-language materials and services, they risk being left behind during our recovery. That's why I'm alarmed that SBA's online EIDL portal remains available only in English, and the agency has still not updated Congress on what actions it's taking to proactively reach out to business owners with limited English proficiency. So could you explain what specific steps your office has taken to ensure that EIDL is accessible to business owners with limited English proficiency, especially considering we provided $25 million for SBA to develop resources in non-English languages?
Thank you, Congresswoman. We translated fact sheets into, I think it was 17 different languages from that perspective, and I'm looking at the chairwoman. I remember during Hurricane Maria, we choked when it came to the language services. So we have a $2 million contract where we use translators. We've not heard anything from the language services perspective when it comes to being able to translate. We do understand that need. Our application is still in English. We have an application in Spanish, and we'll continue to try to figure out how to get more languages as we proceed from that perspective.
Like I said, you have been provided $25 million to translate, and the reason that you haven't heard anything is probably because those people with limited English proficiency are shut out. So I would urge you to translate those applications. Mr. Rivera, Congress took steps to ensure that sole proprietors, independent contractors, and the self-employed were fully included in the small business recovery resources made available during this crisis. And that includes the EIDL Emergency Grant Program established by the CARES Act, which Congress specified was to be valued at $10,000 per applicant, and along with a traditional loan, would work in concert with the Paycheck Protection Program. EIDL would provide a quick injection of working capital to meet operating expenses, and the PPP would enable businesses to retain their employees. I'm deeply concerned about SBA's actually rather shocking decision to cap the emergency grant at just $1,000 per employee, as is inconsistent with congressional intent and has had a disproportionate impact on these independent workers, including so many in the robust creative economy in Southern California. These independent business people also have fixed costs, so they're struggling to pay as many creative industries in my district. And in fact, they've halted production to comply with public health guidelines. So you specified in your testimony that the SBA made adjustments to the EIDL grant in order to make the funding last longer. But how does the SBA justify cutting the grant's value by 90% for independent contractors and sole proprietors? Does the agency have plans to make adjustments to the grant formula so that it can meet the needs of these types of business owners?
We put a lot of analysis into these determinations, these decisions. At the agency level, the decision was to do $1,000 per employee. If you had, self-employed 0 employees, you received a $1,000 grant. Had we used $10,000, we would have been out of funds immediately. We did get the first $10 billion, and then we did get the subsequent $10 billion. We're currently, I think this morning it shows we're at like $16 billion. We would have run out of money, and what we were trying to do basically is just to provide as much assistance across to as many small businesses as possible, and that's kind of the approach we took.
And why is it that you have not deputized SBDCs to provide timely information?
I have to get back with you. I need to have a conversation with the assistant administrator. I thought we were providing clear guidance and clear communications internally. As I mentioned earlier, the information we have internally sometimes gets out before we're able to distribute it through the entire the resource partner perspective.
Times has
Thank you.
expired. And now we recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Balderson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here today and with your testimony and answering some of our questions. A question that I was asking was already asked by a colleague, but I would like to expand on that a little bit. Mrs. Ragmunder asked you, and I want to continue from her question about America's small businesses through previous disasters. You used the example of hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria, as well as floods across the Midwest. Hurricanes Harvey and Irma in 2017 were just weeks apart from each other. For these 2017 storms, did SBA close the EIDL portal for 1/2 of the population?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last part of that question?
Yes. Did the EIDL portal for one sector of the population. For these 2017 storms, did the SBA close the EIDL portal for one sector of the population?
No, I don't believe we did. I mean, we process, we're working on two different systems right now. We have the disaster credit management system that's handling all non-COVID, and then this specific portal is specific to COVID by itself. We've done $1 billion. We've booked $1 billion worth of natural disaster loans this year that are non-COVID. So that track continues to go, as business as usual from that perspective.
Okay, thank you. Follow up to that, during any previous disaster where EIDL funds were awarded by the SBA, was it ever the policy to shut out applicants from one disaster in order for other requestees to have access to EIDL funds?
No, not that I'm aware of. EIDL funds are 2% of natural disasters. Okay. Most of the loans are to homeowners. A lot of people don't understand that Congress gave us the authority back in 1953 for homeowners. Mm-hmm. Lion's share are homeowners, and then businesses, and then business. As part of every business loan, there's an economic injury disaster loan component. But I'm not aware of that, but I can check back with you if there's a misunderstanding.
No, thank you very much. And Madam Chair, I yield back my remaining time.
Mr. Balderson, would you yield for a second?
Yes, ma'am.
So is your question related to the fact that SBA EIDL program shut the portal just to allow agricultural borrowers apply for loans?
Yes, Madam Chair.
So he's asking you if there has been in the history of the EIDL program any time where one group is coming in, like the agriculture or the farmers, and then shutting the portal for everybody else.
Well, we process concurrently. As I mentioned earlier, we continued with the EIDL track, and then we had an ag track continuously at the same time.
Yeah, but these are COVID-19 related borrowers. Farmers applying for loans, and non-farmers were not allowed to apply because the portal was shut down for them.
Well, I'm sorry. Okay, I understand your question now.
And why did you make that decision, and who made that decision?
It was an agency determination.
Why?
Because Congress gave us the authority to make loans to farmers that disaster wasn't able to make loans.
But Congress didn't give you the authority to shut down the portal to every other borrower that were injured by COVID-19.
Right. Well, but since we've opened the portal up since June 15th, I mean, we accepted those 500,000 applications were in the queue. So they delayed maybe, 2 weeks?
Do you realize how many borrowers were calling our offices, crying out because they needed assistance and the portal was shut down for them?
Right.
And clearly stated,
I understand.
down for you, but open for agricultural.
I understand, and I apologize for not answering your question earlier. I didn't quite understand.
I may have asked it incorrectly, so it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just would like to have a sense as to why that happened.
Why the portal was only open for ag businesses? Because at the time the decision was, let's let the ag businesses get in. We've not had authority for agricultural enterprises since the mid-'80s, so we had to stop. We had to retool the system. And then during that period of time, we also got additional funding. We didn't have funding at the time. We needed to get the additional $50 billion. I mean, so there were some stops and goes from the intent of why we went ag only. That was just an agency decision.
I yield my time for Mr. Balderson.
I'll be very brief. Just for those dozens of people who might be watching at home, the thing that we have to have out there is the fact that the EIDL loan program was not open to agriculture or farming originally, and then we passed legislation to open it up to the ag community. So for a period of time, it was only open to the ag community, although the applications were still there, and then it's reopened again. So, I mean, that was the reason behind this, because it hadn't been open, so you had people in the ag community that weren't even eligible for a long time, then they were. Now, I mean, I understand why we might at this point argue with that decision. I had people in my district that were not ag that were wondering, why can't we get this? But that was the reason, correct? Okay. Thank you.
Badly communicated to the general public. Now we recognize the gentle lady from Minnesota, Ms. Craig, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Rivera, I'm sitting here, and this isn't my prepared question, but I just want you to understand, if you really believe that the agency could do better is the best response to the performance. You know, I've got a lot of businesses in my district who, if this were the kind of customer service level that they had provided, they would be out of business 3 months ago. You know, I'm sitting here today going through my email because I've got folks in my district who applied and heard crickets for months, no response from the EIDL program application. I've got a gentleman in my district who finally got a response from you that there was missing information on his application. And we even elevated this to the regional acting director in my office. We were told there was a 24-hour email line that members of Congress could use in order to help our constituents get a response on their EIDL loan applications. 9 days later, we got a response to that email that says there was missing information and still not telling us so that we could tell our constituents what information was missing or what was needed to help that application. So the chairwoman has brought up the lack of communication, but I'm just telling you, in case no one else on your team is telling you directly, that the customer service levels our constituents are facing is terrible in this program. And I understand, I spent 22 years working in business before I came to this Congress and came to this committee. So I understand the volume. I understand that you guys are under a lot of pressure to respond here. But 6 days ago, I sent a response again asking for someone, please, to help this constituent. And I'm sitting here today and still we have no response. And I'm a member of Congress. I can't even imagine what is happening on a daily basis inside the customer service group. And so, you know, I just want to make sure no one is sugarcoating this for you, because I am not going to sugarcoat this for Minnesotans or for the American people. The administration of this program has been absolutely terrible. I just want to say also that, you know, I understand this meeting is about EIDL, and I didn't come here today. I came here to ask a question, but somebody's got to tell the truth about what our constituents are facing. And I appreciate the hard work you've done, Madam Chairwoman, to finally get a member of the SBA to come in front of this committee. I've sent a number of letters to the administrator, Ms. Carranza, and I want to make sure that during this hearing I also have an opportunity just to say that the response on the PPP program has been equally unacceptable. I understand that for a recent GAO report, your administration waited until the very last day to respond to requests for data to the Government Accountability Office, and only replied when that data had already been made public. Why are loan level data not being released at this time, even to the Government Accountability Office? We need a commitment to release a comprehensive list of firms who applied for and received aid under the PPP. We need to make sure that transparency is essential to understand that these funds went to good use. See, that's our role as members of Congress, to make sure that we are doing the best job that we can to oversee the use of taxpayer dollars. So, Mr. Rivera, I want to just say I appreciate you being here today, number one. I know that this isn't going to be all that much fun, but I want to make sure you understand that what has been happening, understanding there have been a lot of challenges with the volume, is simply unacceptable.
So thank you for your comments. We don't take it lightly when we're not providing the customer service that we need to do. If we can talk offline, we can see whatever the issues are. As I mentioned, this morning's report, we get individuals on the loan side through in 5 days, grants 2 days. Was the service slower before? Yes. Are we still getting, we passed 7 million calls at the call center yesterday. A lot of work for a lot of individuals, and we're doing the best we can. And if there's opportunities on how you can help us, or if we need to get better service with you, just let us know. We'll be glad to provide that service.
That's what I was told a month ago.
Okay, well, I'll continue to do my best. I don't know what else to tell you from that perspective.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Rivera, thank you for being here today and answering questions regarding the EIDL program. I always find it interesting when we complain about inefficiencies of government, yet have colleagues who want to make it bigger. It's always been perplexing. But because I've been around, as you can tell, from a few gray hairs a while, in business for 35 years, and I can't think of any agency in business that's ever, or in government that's ever been very efficient as compared to an industry that's accountable directly to a customer for its existence. With all that said, we've spent a lot of time, in fact, all of our time here today, talking about the current history of the program and how it's compared to other programs that you've been involved in with either 9/11 or geographies, name wind disasters and things like that. I would ask you to compare those two. I've heard a lot of this as it pertains to business interruption insurance, why it's not viable for a national pandemic or a national disaster versus a localized geography disaster. One thing I would ask you, and I think this would be a very bipartisan request that shouldn't be controversial at all, should give you a chance to perform at a very high level. This is very fresh, this is very raw, these comments coming from here and from your customer base, the people applying for the loans. Could you commit to us between now and the end of the quarter, now that we're in a new quarter, Q3, so prior to any potential administrative changes, people running the agencies or whatever, could you commit to us about assembling best practices that you've learned from this that you could apply? It's very difficult to take, and I know you've done it with your experience, try to take a localized disaster and extrapolate that across a national disaster. You've tried to do that, and you're a little behind the 8 ball on that, or a lot behind the 8 ball in certain areas. But it would be very easy to take a national pandemic disaster and localize it. So if we could get from you and a commitment from you at this hearing today that you and your team could put together a playbook, if you will, for a simplistic term, that would identify things you should do better, like who you should communicate to and when you should communicate it and what should be communicated. Because we could all sit here and talk about learning, as we did in our office, about the $150,000 cap from the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Examiner. We could go through all of these different things. It doesn't solve our problem, and it doesn't prevent those problems from happening in the future. We need kind of skin in the game, commitment in the game, because then that carries on beyond the ideas and the things that are going to make it work in the future when this happens again. And we hope it's a long time and none of us are here when it happens again. But those in the future, because I think history matters, it matters a lot. It identifies what we shouldn't do again and what we should do right the next time. If you could help us put that into a format that could be given to this committee so that we can hold each other accountable and remind each other what we need to be doing differently as we go forward. Can you commit to that?
Absolutely.
So September 30th, 2020.
Absolutely. And if I can just have like 15 seconds.
Sure, you can have a minute and 34 seconds.
Okay, thank you. COVID viruses were not in the Small Business Act before March the 15th. We weren't responding to COVID. We do have a playbook. We have the Disaster Preparedness and Response Plan. It's for natural disasters. I think we've proved ourselves when it comes to Harvey, Irma, Maria footprint. We had a 20-day response.
Not in Puerto Rico.
Mr. Rivera, if I may, though, I would acknowledge that you have those, and that's because we've all had to deal with regional disasters. But now we have, in our lifetime, in our legislative lifetime, in your administrative lifetime, executive branch lifetime, you have a national pandemic. And we don't have that from 1918 Spanish flu to rely on now. Because I would imagine many of the things that we had then, sans the technology, would be doing the same. We'd be communicating in different format then, but we had the ability to instantly communicate. And I had people calling me, like many others did, they thought they were going to apply for a $2 million loan. They go through all the process until $150,000. And they wasted, in their mind, they wasted a lot of time. They could have gone to a bank and stood up their business quicker and got that. So there was just this lack of communication, which is usually what destroys most relationships and everything that we do. So if we can just get a communication process plan that, again, and I took a minute and 20 seconds of your response time, but I'm acknowledging that you have good regional disaster plans because we unfortunately have to deal with them time and time again, year after year. But it could be 20, 30, 40 years again, but we'll endeavor forever in the congressional records and possibly through legislation, a process how to handle national epidemics / pandemics as we go forward.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Stover.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate Mr. Rivera being here. We know that the Small Business Administration was really given a nearly impossible task. Overnight, they were asked to assist every single small business across our nation that fell on hard times. And I commend the work you've done thus far, but there's a lot more to do. I do want to share some concerns that were brought up here earlier from my constituents. It seems that the SBA has taken some liberties to reduce the cap of loans given out from $2 million to $150,000. Well, this is likely to ensure the maximum number of businesses receive some sort of funding during this crisis. My constituents are rightfully upset. They feel they are being cheated out of what they were promised by our government. With that said, I will be focusing my line of question on the portal. Can you share with us what the SBA is reviewing exactly when an applicant sees, quote, processing in the EIDL portal?
Sure. This is the first time, because we used a streamlined application, we actually identity proofed every small business that came in. So for example, the business name needed to be the same as the name on your checking account. We identity proofed addresses. We identity proofed a lot of these processes. As we moved the small business from the application portal into the loan portal, it was a quick credit check based on a credit score. And once you pass that credit score, then we determined economic injury, 6 months of working capital. That's what the loan was based on. Working capital, economic injury, it's pretty simple. It's sales minus cost of goods sold, so whatever the gross profit was. That's basically your loan from that perspective. The EIDL loan program is meant to pay for fixed operating expenses. It's not for expansion or,
Right.
similar to 7A 504s. But those were some of the requirements that we went.
Okay, with that being said, what is the average time between an application being submitted and a decision being made?
Currently, we're running 41 days for the 5.5 million applications we've processed. We're running 41 days.
So what is the hurdle that slows this process from the time the applicant comes to 41 days?
Yeah, the staff, the amount of volume, standing up the portal. We had 3 stops in this process that is included in the 41 days. We ran out of money. We had $7 billion. Then we got the additional $50 billion that, from that perspective. We had to build a portal we had to stop and do a new application when we got the grant program. We had to stop and do a new application when we got the ag component to it. So there's been 3 hard stops in that process.
So my colleague from Minnesota brought up a good point. When you have an application and they've waited days and days and they call and you've said it wasn't filled out correctly, is there a faster way to do that immediately?
Yep. So we've learned a lot when it comes to filled out correctly. We weren't requiring tax transcripts. We weren't requiring any other due diligence. It's a self-certified form from that perspective. So I need your help if you have examples of where you say that somebody said it wasn't filled out correctly. I'm kind of curious to see what exactly they're being asked for. We're very crisp on when we do the decision, we decision it, and then we move on, and then they have the opportunity to come back for reconsideration.
What is the SBA doing to ensure applicants have the most access to the information, guidances, status updates, and other important information during this economic downturn?
Yeah, so that's one of the things looking back, specifically for the EIDL program. We didn't have a transparent portal for the small business owners as we do with the disaster loan application portal. Congress gave us that directive years ago, so we built this portal so you can go in and you can figure out where you're at in the queue from that perspective. We didn't do that. In hindsight, we should have done that, and that's a lesson learned that we have.
Well, I appreciate you being here and taking our questions. I mean, the goal is when you know better, you do better. This pandemic came to our shores through no fault of our own, and we're going to get through this together, but we need you and other members at the SBA to really understand livelihoods are at stake. Much of our economy is at stake, and small businesses are the engine of our economy, and we're going to need much more help. And I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Spano, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that. And just to like to associate myself with many of the comments related to concerns expressed about communication. I will say in my district, I got literally hundreds of calls with respect to the frustration that business owners were having getting information and not having questions answered and so forth, not knowing about the status of their applications. And so just want to reiterate that. We can do better, and we have to, frankly. What is the current level of funding that remains under the EIDL program?
So we have $360 billion, and we have loaned $130 billion.
Okay.
So what's that,
About 100?
230?
230, okay.
Yes, sir.
Do you have any projections as to how long those resources will last given the current run?
We do that analysis daily. We have a meeting with the chief of staff, with the chief financial officer, with the chief operating officer. There's a team of about 5-6 individuals, and we do that analysis daily from that perspective. We have a queue of 8 million. We feel that we can. There's room with 8 million at some point. I'm not sure when, but we do that analysis daily.
Your best guess would be we're going to run out in a month. We're going to run out in 3 months.
I'm not. I apologize. I'm not in the guessing game. This analysis is pretty comprehensive. It contains a lot of factors: our approval rate, how many applications are pending.
Okay.
From that perspective.
Let's go this route. At the current rate, the burn rate, what are you extending in loans per week right now?
We're running. And I can share this information with you. I mean, we've had some big weeks. Last week, we did $14 billion in approvals. So, our biggest week was the week of May 31st, $24 billion. By the way, Katrina Rita Wilma was $11 billion, so we did 2 Katrinas in a week. Katrina Rita Wilma's in a week. So, I haven't put the math on this $15 billion, but if you're looking at 200 and something, couple of months.
Over the last couple of weeks or several weeks in June, let's say, has the number of loans extended gone, or the amount of loans given, has it come down each week?
It's what we've fluctuated between 200,000. I mean, the week of May 31st, we did 400,000 approvals. The week of June 7th, 200,000. The week of June 14th, 300,000. The week of June 21st, 300,000. So it's pretty steady state.
Okay. One of the things that's been mentioned was the decision to cap the amount of the grants at $1,000 per employee. That was my understanding. Why was that decision made? And second question is, was that communicated to applicants, and was it communicated to members of Congress prior to the decision being made?
So the decision was based on, at the time we had $10 billion. We've approved 4.8 million applications, so we would need $48 billion. So we have 20. So we based the 1 to 10 based on, some due diligence we did. We communicated when we had when we had the discussion with the small business.
Okay.
We didn't communicate, the 1 to 10 ahead of time. And in hindsight, we probably should have.
Yeah, I think that probably would have been a good idea because we were getting calls from our constituents saying, I just got $3,000 dumped into my account last night, but I have no idea why it was $3,000.
No, that's a really good point.
Yeah, so that would be helpful. I think that goes in line, again, with the importance of communication. I think that some of the other members have expressed concern about. That's all I have. I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider.
Thank you, and good morning. And sorry I was on the floor speaking, so I am just getting here and catching up. But wanted to touch base. And I know this has been a challenging time for the SBA over the last several months. It's a challenging time, obviously, for our country. I had a conversation on Monday with the administrator talking about some of the issues we face with the EIDL program. I know I heard from so many people about the uncertainty. We're in uncertain times to begin with. This virus, the pandemic, the response has created so much anxiety for businesses. Will they be able to get through just day to day? And we piled on top of that, unfortunately, with so much of the stutter steps and challenges we face with the loans. In my own district, as an example, we had a wonderful webinar. The SBA folks in Illinois are working so hard and just bending over backwards. But they told our businesses, and there were 1,000 people on this call, that they would have a decision within 21 days, or their money within 21 days, and the advance, $10,000 advance within 3 days. Obviously, that didn't happen. So I guess where I'd start with is, we are where we are now. We have the decision of the $150,000. We have the change in how that emergency $10,000 was let out. It's June 30th has come. It's July 1st. What do we tell to our businesses? How do we give them the confidence that the SBA is going to be there for them, is going to give them the information? I can order a pizza and track it from the time of order to delivery every step along the way and know when it's going to arrive. Our business should be able to at least have a similar sense of when they apply for a loan, how much they're going to get and when they're going to get it.
So thank you and thank you for spending some time with the administrator and the call that we had on Monday. So today, let me fast forward to today. Over the last since the beginning of time, since we started this in mid-March, we're running about 41 days to fully process these loans, approve decline from that perspective. What are we doing right now? I looked at this morning's report. We're processing grants in 2 days. We're processing loans in 5 days. Everything has been processed. It's not in this application portal. It's in either the loan queue or the grant queue from that perspective. So, in hindsight, I wish we could have been quicker. I wish we could have maybe been a little bit more communicative. Now that I'm hearing a lot of
this is going to come off more harsh than I mean it, but we went through this crisis. We did try to slam a whole lot through a small pipe in a very short time. But being perfectly honest, when I hear we're doing really well now, that's kind of like the diner saying we crushed it. We got crushed at lunch, but at 3 p.m, things look fine. But I know there's going to be a dinner hour. I know that as these loans, the money that companies have borrowed is consumed, they're going to need to come back and they need more help. I am confident that in a bipartisan way, we're going to find a way in Congress to help these companies. What is the SBA doing today in that afternoon lull to make sure that when we get to the next rush, that we won't fall back into the 41-day time frame?
Well, we don't consider 2 to 3 million applications in the queue a lull right now. I mean, we're still working 7 days a week, the 10 to 12 hours a day. We've learned a lot, but what I meant to say, or what I intended to say, is that we're a better organization today than we were when we started this process back in mid-March. The system's working faster. We have individuals through the queue. We've gone from 1,000 employees up to 7,000 employees. We're better trained. We're better prepared as we continue through this journey.
Are there specific changes that you have to improve that? Are the changes completed and ready to go? And if they're not completed, what is the timeline to get them complete?
So we're pretty completed from the perspective of things we've learned as we go through. I mean, every week we have a different build to address a specific issue, I mean, from that perspective. So we're in a good place right now, but we still do have a lot of work that we need to complete.
Okay, and I know this is changing week to week, but that's one of the frustrations so many businesses had, is that things kept changing week to week coming from the SBA and Treasury. The instructions kept changing on the EIDL loans. There was application 1 and then application 2. Uncertainty of whether I was going to keep my place in line if I did the first application when I applied for the second application. I know we're going to have to be flexible. We're going to have to adapt because this virus is so dynamic. But what confidence can you give, not just me and my colleagues, but every small business in this country, that the SBA is going to provide some stability in this storm?
I mean, we pride ourselves in customer service. I know we've not been successful in many individuals' minds. I mean, but we have provided this $130 billion to 2.1 million small businesses that employ 11 million people. I mean, so I think we've had some level of success. Could we do better? Always. I mean, we continue to strive to be the best. And that's why we continue to have these weekly sessions where we try to figure out what's the challenge that we need to address next and continue on.
Okay. And I don't want to question your intent or any SBA employee's intent. I know how hard everybody is working. I know that we're asking the world of you. But at this moment, in this crisis, we need the world from you. And we're here to give whatever help we can, but we really need the SBA to step up and deliver in the next round. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Now we recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And sometimes there are advantages, I think, from being dead last or close to dead last. Thank you, Mr. Rivera, for being here. I want to take a moment to say how excited I am that we're back in our committee room or in a committee room. I think it benefits the dynamic, and for those who can or desire to be here, we can have that interaction in person. I want to thank momentarily here Joe Hartz of our committee staff for his work in enabling me to do that even when we weren't in a committee room. And in the comments, I think here on the topic, Mr. Rivera, and I thank you. I was listening to the arrows coming at you, and maybe some of them are partially deserved, and you have to take them all. I want to associate myself with comments of Mr. Hearn in particular, and I want to sort of strike a balance in what I ask you, because I do think it was striking to me reading your testimony, and there was one part I wasn't 100% clear on, and the numbers probably would make people's eyes glaze over a little bit. But when you talk about all of the disaster loans approved by the SBA since 1953. This was like by a factor of a couple more bigger than that, and I think I've got that right. And even if you get down to businesses, I think it said all the business disaster loans up until COVID-19 are like $20.9 billion, and then the numbers. I don't think this is just business loans, but the ones approved since June 20 or as of June 26, over $125 billion, 2 million loans. It's just a ton of work that you were saddled with. I do have this observation, though. As I hear you were talking about a 41-day turn time. When Congress, and my being a new member, when Congress first appropriated money in that pre-CARES Act to the disaster loan program, I was gearing up to go out and evangelize that. And then I heard from talking to the regional administrator in my state that it took 30 days roughly to get a loan out. And I was like, whoa, why so long? And then I talked to a member who said the disaster loan program is really kind of a disaster. And so I don't know I don't have the experience to know what the background was. So I've heard the chairwoman speak about it here today a bit, variety of topics that have been raised. I think the thing is that we have a culture in which people expect pretty good speed, and they're dealing with the private industry, Rocket Mortgage or whoever else, and things happen pretty quickly. Do you try to establish standards, though, for the program, not just in this crisis period, but before, to compare yourselves in terms of speed and efficiency and effectiveness to the private sector?
We do. As I mentioned, when I first having this discussion with the Administrator Carranza, We have a disaster preparedness and response plan. It has 4 levels, 0 to 50,000 applications, 50 to 250, 250 to 500, and 500 plus. We give ourselves 15, 30, 45, 60 days. That was out of the window day one. This COVID is not the disaster model that we've ever followed. We had to just start from scratch. We do use that private sector company that does lending, and we use that platform, but we had to stop for 2 weeks in order to develop that platform because, I can't survive. Survive is not the right word, but two loans per loan officer per day is not acceptable. I mean, we're doing 25 plus. So we're trying to use as many private sector best practices as we can. Had we not had that Harvey, Irma, Maria contract for surge, we would have had to gone out. So we thought we were prepared. We learned a lot.
Yeah.
The level of preparedness is just something that we need to continue to work on.
You mentioned one thing that struck me, that you began to use DocuSign. And what struck me about that, frankly, was people have been using DocuSign with me as a private individual for a decade, maybe more. Why not earlier on things like that? That is an example on things like that.
Yeah, that's part of being the government. We're just trying to use the money as judiciously as possible, but it's a proven fact now. We can get a disbursement out in a day. Everything's digital from that perspective. The platform's there. We just haven't gotten around to spending the money for that. But now that we have that, I mean, that's the path forward.
I think bottom line, I will say this, I think some of the blame is borne by Congress. We appropriated money to that program. I was ready to go out and sell it, to tell people that was a path for relief. I think those members in Congress had a reason to know that that was going to be a problem. And those expectations were in part created here. I do commend you, and I encourage you to think of a private business way as often as possible, because I think you can increase, if you're chasing a service standard that you see in private sector, you're probably going to do a better job than excluding that from your thought. Thank you, sir.
Understand. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. And we're going to go to a second round for any member who wishes to make any questions. I have 2 or 3 questions, Mr. Rivera. So you said before that the denial rate was 48%, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that represents out of 5 million, 2.5 million people.
Yes, ma'am.
So what recourse does an applicant have if they feel they were denied, wrongly denied? Who conducts those reviews, and what is the average processing time?
Sorry. So when we look at, when we decline somebody, we give them reconsideration rights. We went off of strictly a credit score. I mean, that's the fast process that we used. When we go under reconsideration, we ask for, if they're a sole proprietor, we ask for a copy of a Schedule C or some type of business application that shows, because there may be repayment ability even though you have a lower credit score. That's a historical approach.
Okay.
So we're using that approach.
But you just said that this pandemic or this disaster is unprecedented. There's no comparison. So why is it that you didn't consider the national impact of this pandemic? Did FBA at any time consider modifying the underwriting minimums?
Well, the credit score we use is D paper. If you look at the private sector, it's not A, B, C, it's D paper. The credit score is pretty low. And unfortunately, I mean, we have to set up a standard, and that's the standard we use. We could have lowered it, but the risk associated with lowering it was the decision we didn't make.
Okay. So what do you need today from us?
I think we're in a good spot. Obviously, we need to do better communication.
Okay. So let me ask you, given the fact that we have seen a spike on the virus in different places, and also that some states are either shutting down or halting reopening, those businesses are going to be impacted. Florida, Colorado, Arizona. Do you expect for many more millions businesses to apply for the disaster
So the declaration period for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program is 9 months. It runs from the middle of March to the middle of December. I mean, so we will continue to process any applications we have, as long as there's funding available.
As long as the money is there. So my question is, do you think that based on what is left, how much money is left on the IDA program?
We have 360 billion, and we spent 130, so we have 230
And
billion.
so are you making or doing any economic impact of this, of the trend that we are seeing in other states?
We're responding to the 8 million applications we have. I mean, we've not done the analysis of another pandemic from that perspective. I mean, but we do a daily analysis on how much money's left and what's in the queue.
So this is the thing. You, the administration, requested $50 billion. I supported $100 billion. And SBA said that they needed half of that. It's showing that you needed more than half of that.
I'm not sure how I'm supposed to respond to that. I mean.
Okay, well, I'm just warning you.
Okay, I understand.
My time has expired, the ranking member, Mr. Chabot.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't use the whole 5 minutes, but just a couple of follow-up questions. Mr. Rivera, I think when asked about the period of time that it was ag only, that you were accepting agriculture only applications, I think you said 2 weeks. In conferring with my staff, we seem to think it was longer than that, maybe from mid-April to mid-June approximately, that it was only applications ag that you were taking. Can you clear that up?
I need to fact check myself.
Okay.
I'll get back with you on the
Okay, that's
specific
fine.
timeframe.
I'm not trying to
sorry.
put you on a spot, but I do think it's longer than that, because I know we were getting inquiries not only from people in my district, but talking to other members of Congress as ranking member of this committee. So, and it was, I think, an extensive period of time. So if you could check on that, we'd appreciate that. And then on that same topic, on that ag-only period of time, just for future reference, it would seem to me that there was maybe some more reasonable accommodation to those folks who were not ag during that period of time. Since ag folks didn't have access, I certainly appreciate you might want to get more of those folks, because now they are eligible, so you want to take care of them. That's certainly understandable. Maybe just, pulling something out of the hat, maybe 50-50 or so, to say, okay, 50% is going to be set aside for ag because you've never had it before. But there was still, I think, a considerable need, demand for non-ag small businesses who needed these EIDL loans. So just for future reference, I would just suggest considering something like that, or consulting with Congress, because we really didn't have much of any input in some of those decisions were coming out, and we were having considerable difficulty getting our phone calls responded to. Understandably, you were very, very inundated with trying to help people all over the country, and that was your number one priority. But just for future, we can get better, I think. If you want to comment, go.
Understood.
Sure.
Thank you. I mean.
Oh, you agree?
Yeah, no, I agree.
All right,
I
thank
agree.
you.
The communication piece needs to be.
I appreciate that. And then finally, and this is something we've all said, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse here, but the frustration on both sides of the aisle, more than anything else, we need to communicate better with each other. The administration, the Congress, so that we can communicate with our constituents all over the country who are, after all, the backbone of the American economy. Half the people who work in America work for a small business. About 70% of the new jobs created in the American economy, small businesses. So, you all just need to communicate better with us and the American people so that we can communicate better with the American people too. Okay? Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for your leadership on this discussion. When the EIDL program first launched, many business owners in my district was very excited. However, that excitement has turned to frustration. Many constituent business owners have reached out to my office because they're waiting weeks or months to hear anything about their EIDL application. They were denied EIDL loans because of unsatisfactory credit scores, including my constituent. Now, the chairwoman raised this in her introduction discussion, and a pharmacist that she talked about is someone who is in my district who testified before this committee. All except one of the constituents denied one Black. In fact, Black business owners in the U.S. has declined the most of any ethnic group at 41%. This is quite concerning to coming from the city of Philadelphia, where over 40% of the population is African American. In addition, the information contained in the denial letter from the SBA was very sparse, as SBA did not indicate what application credit scores was looking for. So the question I would like to ask, the CARES Act provides that SBA may use alternative appropriate methods to determine applications' ability to repay beyond their credit score. Does SBA consider applications based on criteria or other credit scores? That's the question I'd like to ask you.
To respond to your question, we started with credit score as part of the streamline application, and if you want reconsideration, you can provide us with a copy of your tax return. We can get a tax transcript to the IRS. I mean, that was something that was waived by Congress. So we use that as an indicator. And if the businesses come back and they ask us for additional assistance because they were declined, we can determine cash flow based on what they've reported, the IRS from a tax transcript perspective.
I'd like to then follow up with a couple of questions. Do different staff from the Office of Disaster Assistance handle the non-COVID disease loan applications?
So we have a dedicated team that's working on natural disasters. We've done $1 billion worth of natural disasters this fiscal year. We did $500 million up in Puerto Rico from the earthquake that was earlier this year. And then we have dedicated teams that work on the COVID effort.
Is the processing time for these applications still within the normal time frame?
Well, according to our historical goals, we were supposed to process 500,000 applications in 60 days. We've done 5.5 million in 41 days. I mean, we're exceeding the internal goals, but I mean, the goal is a goal. I mean, we need to get the assistance out as soon as possible, from my perspective.
Is there a need for additional staff?
We're at 7,100 employees. We haven't stopped hiring. We're trying to get as many staff on board. One of the things, and let me just, if I can pivot for just a second, we talk about the private sector. We contracted with a company that allows us to have call agents 24/7. So we're open, and it's just based on need. It's been a phenomenal contract. It enabled us, of the 7,100 employees we have, I would say probably 2,000 to 3,000 are contractors. We have a traditional model where we have 1,000 core employees. We have 2,000 to 3,000 reservists. So, the combination of all these different factors is what we used in responding. We haven't stopped hiring, though. We'll continue to hire until this event is completed.
One last question. If you had to rate the program yourself, particularly relating to how the African American community is affected, how would you rate it at this point?
So we don't collect ethnicity or race information in the disaster loan program. We haven't collected that information since 1994. We don't know who an applicant is. From a race perspective, we treat all applicants equal. I mean, so from our perspective, a disaster is a disaster, and we don't focus. We focus on the disaster survivor and the small business in this case.
Yeah, I understand the question, but I guess what I'm asking is, from a processing standpoint, I'm not asking if you do it based on race, but in terms of how you think it's been effective, because you obviously heard people raise questions about its effectiveness. Hello?
He cannot hear you.
Sorry. I forgot what I said. So
Well, time has expired, if
Okay.
you don't mind, but you could answer his question.
So we process, so if I'm a small business, 41 days sounds great for me, but if I'm the small business owner and needed money day 5, day 10, that's the relevant point. So we're trying to get the job done as soon as possible.
Time has expired, and now we recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Mr. Rivera, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to pursue that just a little bit further. You just said 41 days sounds good to you, and just give me a little bit more insight. I'm a layperson from the perspective of how you originate loans. I've heard in the course of the hearing, listening carefully, that you were absolved of the obligation to do some things like getting a tax transcript in each case is not necessary. You got to do some things to identify people, confirmed identification. I get that. I don't know whether there might be some shortcuts. Yeah, I know you got to get documents signed. We talked about DocuSign and dispersing. That could be done pretty quickly. I heard that you've got the credit application, the credit score, which is a significant piece of information. What else has to be done by a loan officer?
The loan officer historically gets, in an 8-hour day, they get 4 hours to review the credit. We give them 15 minutes. So we've really streamlined that process. I think the challenge we just had was basically the sheer volume we've experienced.
Okay, but what are they doing in the course of that review? For example, if you've got a range of credit scores that are applicable or that are acceptable to SBA, and I'm a loan officer, I don't need 15 minutes to look at that credit score. I'm trying to understand what else they have to do to examine an application.
No, I understand. So 30% of our applications are what we call auto-approved, and a team lead just needs to, it's an inherently governmental position that a team lead needs to approve that application. We can't let the system do it. So the other 70%, they just go through and they check the variables. They call the disaster the small business, and they fact-check some of these different variables.
Like what?
Location, address. Sometimes somebody doesn't, their bank account doesn't match their business name. So can you provide us evidence of something that shows those things connecting from that perspective?
Okay, so you said that, and then help me with this part. So if you said that, I think you just said a processor gets like 15 minutes to look at an application, and based on the things you just told me about, I'm not sure it'll take 15 minutes, but 15 minutes is 15 minutes. Help me understand then why 41 days sounded pretty good.
Well, I'm just saying 41 days from my perspective, based on the traditional goal of 15, 30, 45, 60. I mean, we beat the 60-day goal. My intent was not to say we're satisfied with 41 days. Obviously, we want to provide the fastest assistance available based on the plan, the historical disaster plan.
Yeah.
That's what it's based on. And there's a reasonableness from a time perspective. If we could have done it in 15 days or 30 days, I mean, we would have done that. But the point today is, I mean, we're doing these in 5 days right now for the current queue. Going back, we've learned a lot.
Right, and I hear you, and I think that's maybe the nature of the rub. If you're talking about expectations or people being dissatisfied, customer's always right. When rule number 2 is when you refer to rule number 1. A customer is always right, but I think it's hard. And even when I interact with you as a layperson about that origination process, I go, that seems like that could get done, particularly if you're excused from a lot of the requirements by the legislation. Maybe if Congress had looked at it again, they might have said, without regard to credit worthiness, I don't know, and excuse you from having to look at the credit score, but that doesn't seem like that takes very long. I think those are the things that people find difficult or frustrating. And the other thing, just to balance that again, I think a balance is appropriate, and maybe to balance Congresswoman Craig's comment about interacting with your congressional liaison, we had the opposite experience in my office. That is, we had a situation where someone's PPP loan, to make a different reference, had gone awry, not because of anything SBA did, because the financial institution submitting it, there was a snag. And they were able very quickly to tell us that there was no loan. They followed up and said, you got to give us an EIN number. And then they researched it and came back, and we were able to pinpoint the problem and get it solved for that constituent. So I know I'm sure there are differing stories, but that ought to always be the objective, obviously, is to respond in a substantive way and quickly to members of Congress, and with more than just a put-off or a repetition of a previous statement. But appreciate, in that case, it worked for us. And any comment you have on that, I'd welcome in the 30 seconds I have left.
And if you have any suggestions, we're always, we always look forward to any suggestions. We can work with you on ways to process or streamline this process. I'm open.
My experience was positive. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Snyder, is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for indulging us and offering a chance. Mr. Rivera, you mentioned some numbers for the IDL program. I just want to clarify them. Of the $300+ billion that was lent, how much has been lent out so far?
As of this morning, we've loaned $132 billion.
So more than $200 billion still left to lend?
Yes, sir.
So I guess I have to go back to this arbitrary cap of $150,000. I know so many businesses who needed more, applied for more, and were told you can't get more. What are they supposed to do?
Well, so I think in some situations what we learned is when you apply for a loan, we don't ask them what the loan amount is. We base it on 6 months of working capital. So there was a little bit of a misunderstanding on the communication piece. We go back to what you've generated over the last 12 months based on your sales, cost of goods sold, whatever your gross profit margin. We took 6 months, and that's what your loan.
You didn't cap it at $150,000?
No, what I'm saying is that that's the loan amount that was determined. From that perspective, we started at 500, but I think if we would have done 500, I don't know the decision was, let me take you back. The decision was we had $50 billion, leveraged it 7 times. We had 5 million applications. We could not have done a $500,000 loan at the time. So there's a lot of analysis, whether it's 2 months of working capital, 4 months of working capital, 6 months, and then we did all the variables, and the decision was made by the agency to move forward with the $150,000.
All right, so I don't do math that well. Actually, I do, but if you lent out $100 billion, there's 200 left. That's roughly a third of the program. If I take 150,000, if you'd done 450,000, you would have consumed all the money. Certainly more than the 150,000. And I've talked to so many constituents, not an insignificant number, that have said we needed more money. We have competitors who got more money than we did because they were earlier in the queue. We're trying to compete. And the 150,000, I just want to be clear, that was a cap. It was a cap the SBA set that leaves 2/3 of the money still left in the program.
Well, so, I mean, I guess it's how you want to cut it. I mean, the average loan's $61,000, and, we talked about, 80% are below the $150,000. I mean, our average size loan for below $150,000, I'll fact check myself, is like $40-something thousand. We did have, as you're mentioning, 19% at the 150, so that maybe would have had more eligibility than the 150,000. 1% are above that 150,000, but we've had more than 80%. Average loan 61,000.
Yeah, but it's like saying we're getting our loans out in 41 days. Sure, 80% is a good number, but that leaves 20% of the businesses who are getting just enough to get close to what they need, but close doesn't count it to paying the bills that they're going to have.
But remember, at the time, we also had PPP for payroll, so I understand, the EIDL program is expanded. It's working capital. It's more than just payroll. So that was kind of the dovetail approach. I mean, we had 2 factors. We had the EIDL.
So I'd like to explore this separately because it's a big issue, but I have a minute and a half left, and I want to go another thing. You talked about, or you were asked earlier, how would you rate the program? And I don't want to rate. I know how hard it was, and like I said, I know how hard everyone's working, and I don't mean to be critical of all the employees who are literally working 24/7, and I know that and appreciate that. When I did my consulting, I worked with small businesses. I would close the door with the management team and say, all right, let's start with a blank piece of paper. Forget what you have. If you could start over, what would you do? If you could start over, we're not in a private room, so this is public, but if you could start over, if you could design this system, because we know this pandemic is going to last into the future, what would you do to make sure that we do a better job supporting America's small businesses?
Well, I think we had the right approach with the surge contract. I mean, that's one thing that we did good. probably should have had visibility in the application portal.
Okay, not looking back, let's look forward. What can we as Congress give you to ensure, I want the SBA to succeed, not just to clear the threshold, but to blow it out of the water, to be so good that people are coming back and saying, we thank God for the government because we were able to weather this storm, get through this pandemic, and look to a future to ensure that our kids and our grandkids are going to be prosperous.
I mean, I think we can always improve, but with turning a grant in 2 days and a loan in 5 days, I think that's pretty good service. Since we had these 2 million come in, since the portal, since the June 15th timeframe.
Okay. I'm out of time, but I do want to say, Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member, thank you for having this hearing. Whatever we can do to help the SBA succeed, count me in doing it. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and now I recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans, for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Again, I thank you. This is very important on this leave. I want to go back to something you said, where applicants who are denied the EIDL loans are given the opportunity for reconsideration. Can you describe this process and how long does reconsideration take?
The reconsideration process is when they submit information for us to determine their cash flow. I mean, I think it's 75% of the loans are based on a lower credit score. So we ask them for a copy of their tax transcript, or we get a copy of the tax transcript from the Internal Revenue Service. So that's the process. There's eligibility cases where somebody opened a business post-COVID, post that January date from that perspective. We try to work through all these issues. We have about 100,000 applications. I think it's in the queue right now on reconsideration, and we continue to work these as fast as possible. It's the manual process, or it's the DCMS 2.0 process.
I understand. What I want to get to that part, you say manual. How long does it take in reconsideration? Can you quantify that?
Yeah, it's taking right now. I mean, I don't have the statistic in front of you, and I can get back to you for the record. I think it's taken 2 to 3 weeks on average.
2 to 3 weeks.
Yes, sir.
So if an applicant is something approved after reconsideration, but if there are no funds left in the EIDL program, will there be a remedy for the applicant?
Well, I mean, we have a couple $100 billion left, so I mean, it may at some point, but right now it's not an issue.
Okay, that's not an issue then. Right. The SBA is still processing EIDL and physical disaster loan application for non-COVID disasters, such as those related to civil unrest, tornadoes, and flooding. Processing these non-loans as they come in, is the processing time for these applications still within the normal time frame?
Oh, yes, sir. I mean, we're processing these. I think the goal right now is like 10 days on average. We declared a couple of counties in Illinois and a couple of counties in Southern California for the civil unrest, but we've booked $1 billion worth of non-COVID disaster assistance this fiscal year.
So you have booked $1 billion for that?
I'm sorry, we've approved $1 billion worth of disaster assistance across the board. These are all disasters. We had this earthquake down in Puerto Rico. We've had floods. We've had tornadoes. We've had most of those type of disasters. We generally do about $1.1 billion a year. That's what we put in the congressional justification. So we're right on track. Not that that's just the path we generally take, but that's a 10-year average.
So the two places you said was California and Illinois?
Yes, sir. And we have a couple of, I'm sorry.
No, Greg, you said in California, there's counties within California and Illinois you have approved then?
Yes, sir. For civil unrest, we have 6, I'm sorry, keep interrupting. We have 6 other, I think, pending pending requests that the state's working on assistance from. I don't have that information here with you, but I can get back with you for the record.
Yeah, I'd be interested if you relay that to, the chairwoman and pass that on to the committee right there. I appreciate, all you're trying to do. And I know it's not easy and we work, but I appreciate the chairwoman for having this hearing because, transparency and openness, as she has talked about, is extremely important because, you have people out there, who hear about it and to no fault of their own, maybe the pandemic or civil unrest, neither one of their fault of their own. The execution, you can understand, is something that's very important. Am I correct?
Oh, yes, sir. We definitely understand that.
Right. I thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me this time, and I really appreciate all you've done on this, okay?
The gentleman
Thank you. I
just
yield
left.
back.
Thank you. Mr. Rivera, thank you again for your testimony on SBA IRA program and its performance in response to COVID-19. I understand the historic and unprecedented demand for the program and that it may have been challenging to process applications. However, it's July 1st, and here we are. You need to improve communications with borrowers. Customer service across the board has been an issue that time and again has been raised, whether in hearings or phone calls coming in from constituents. So also, you need to improve SBA communications with the authorizing committee, both the Senate and the House. It's two bodies. It just can't be the Senate. You have to improve your communication with this committee. And as Congress continues to seek ways to help businesses that need relief in order to survive the pandemic, I will implore you that you send to us any request that you consider is essential in order to perform your responsibility of providing economic relief to the businesses that we are supposed to serve. So I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statement and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business before the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you.